Hello, good morning. Today we're speaking to Curtis Dunkel. Curtis is a professor and he's also a specialist in personality research. Hello, Curtis.
Hi, Lipton. How are you?
I'm good, and how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
So, Curtis, tell us about the Big Five.
Sure. The big five are thought to be the highest order personality traits, and they include openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And so these are thought to be independent as well. So everyone would have at kind of the base level of their personality, a mixture of these.
All right. And Curtis, you have done fascinating studies on personality, life history, income, etc. Tell us about the relationship between personality and income.
Sure. Well, we recently completed a study on something called the general factor of personality. And as I mentioned, the big five are thought to be independent, so they don't correlate. However, they do correlate, suggesting that there is a higher order personality trait. Some people think there might be two higher order above the big five, which are thought to be plasticity and stability, kind of flexibility and kind of the ability to maintain one's personality. Uh, for the most part, a colleague of mine, Dimitri van der Linden, and I, taking off from the work of others such as Jan Music, AJ Figueiredo, Philip Rushton, and several others, we followed up on this idea that there's a general factor of personality, so a single personality trait that explains a lot of the differences between people. And we've recently found that this includes differences in income as well. So previously it was thought that things like extroversion and conscientiousness explained a little bit of income variance above general intelligence, but we find that personality, it's primarily the general factor of personality that explains differences in income beyond general intelligence.
All right. So for example, some have argued that there's a relationship between confidence and income, and also that agreeableness is linked to lower levels of
Yeah,
compensation.
yeah. Actually, that is funny, isn't it? That agreeableness is actually slightly inversely related to
Well,
income.
I think it is interesting but plausible. Remember, if you're applying for a job and your salary is 50 grand, but because of one's ability to negotiate, you say, no, I prefer to earn 100,000 or 75. Depending on your intellect, you may get an increase. So agreeableness obviously is correlated with less income because such individuals are not necessarily the best of negotiators.
Yeah, I've often thought of agreeableness in the way I frame it, at least the way I think about it as well, is let's say you want to be honest with someone, but it might hurt their feelings. Do you tell a little fib, to spare their feelings, or do you be forthright with them? And so, yeah, just being kind of a little bit more point blank, I guess, and a little less concerned about others' feelings can assist in increasing your income.
Yeah.
But what we find is that it's not just agreeableness that is going on here, but if you have agreeableness, but you can flexibly use it,
Yes,
that might
I,
be better
I was
than
just
just
getting
closed
to that
quote.
point. So, for example, if you are a CEO, it makes sense to be diplomatic and tactful. But for ordinary workers like entry level people, agreeableness is not a positive trait. As an employer, you demand workers who are flexible and willing to compete with your competitors. So agreeableness benefits senior managers who are forced to genuflect to their superiors.
Yeah, and what we're finding as well is some fairly recent work just got accepted for publication And I actually see it in one of my sons as well. Um, People who are high in this general factor of personality, they prefer social jobs, but related to income, um, they also are curious about being entrepreneurs. They really kind of want to go out there and kind of get it, and I think, like you mentioned, they're confident. They believe they can do it.
Yes, I'm sure you're familiar with Woodley's cultural mediation hypothesis. So
I
smart,
am.
yes, smart people are likely to conform to the dominant cultural construct. It's like woke politics and social media companies.
Do you think
So
there's got to be some sort of something else to it? Is there a curvilinear relationship there? I mean, at
I,
some point, right? You're too smart. You
no, as I said earlier, it's a strategy. So, for example, someone who is intelligent is not necessarily agreeable, because intelligent people promote their self-interest, and to get ahead, they will genuflect or succumb to the demand of those who are more superior. So it's there's a relationship between IQ and the extent of one's agreeableness. Yeah, I think that's how we should interpret the relationship. And then I also wanted to ask you about confidence. Men, so for example, when I get a request, I often say yes if I'm interested in the person. Studies have shown that women doubt themselves even when they are very brilliant. So I sent a request to a lady recently. She's fairly smart, and she sent an email saying, I'm boring. And I said, no, you're not boring, and we're going to do the show. Men usually say yes. And this, some argue that this accounts for the gender gap. Men are more confident, ambitious, they take risk. Women are higher in conscientiousness. And another result, because of their ability to follow rules, they can get ahead. But beyond a certain level, you need confidence and aggression.
well, it sounds like you've been talking to Ed a little bit,
Yes,
which
of course, I've
is what is it? What girl? The
head
front
girl, a
girl?
genius, and the head girl type.
Head girl. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
no, I've spoken to him twice. I was on his show and he was interviewed by me. So I've spoken to her head twice.
I've never met Ed, but he seems like a fun guy.
Yeah, what do you what don't both of you collaborate at times?
We have. I'm trying to think if there's one paper. I don't know if we've been on two together or not. So that the paper you had was the mutant says
Yes,
there's
we're
no
getting to
God.
that. We're getting to that in the latter
Okay,
half.
that one for sure. I don't know if we've collaborated on a different one.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, kind of putting together Ed's ideas, and you said income. I've been really interested in um, Bitcoin lately, and you see Dimitri and Ed have this idea of, well, really, people who really strive, who really change the world. They're a combination of high intelligence and high testosterone.
Yes.
And I think I see this in a lot of these Bitcoin maximalists. And I'm it gives me more confident that they're going to achieve what they desire.
Yeah. Testosterone has positive and negative. It's good for leadership ability and intelligence, but many studies do show a link between testosterone and violence, yet there are some studies disputing this link. Recently, I've been reviewing more studies that are skeptical of the relationship between testosterone and violence. But what we do know is that there is a strong relationship between testosterone, intelligence, and leadership. And testosterone is not necessarily being aggressive. So, for example, John Brown has big muscles, and as such, is able to instill fear in others. John Stewart is skinny and not very domineering, but John Stewart is a better strategist and is also low in empathy. So testosterone is correlated with what I call intellectual masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, physically I'm very, very small, but in terms of social dominance, I score pretty well. I'm the type to demand that people do stuff. So some of my colleagues often say that I should go to the gym because my physique should match my intellect. Yes, it's just like when I first sent you the mail, you were a bit hesitant, and I wouldn't let up. So that's my personality. I tend to be a
Yeah,
bit
yeah.
demanding. But Curtis, I this is not necessarily your era, but as a psychologist, I'm sure you have seen these studies. Some years ago, The Atlantic published a piece saying that venture capitalists invest in masculine men and aggressive women, but feminine men are less likely to secure funding. So is there also a relationship between masculinity and income?
I don't know.
Yeah, but remember, masculinity could be a function of what we just discussed:
Mhm.
testosterone, aggression, and confidence.
No, I think you're answering your own question.
Okay, okay then. And it's also interesting that we often talk about height. However, young men who experience a growth spurt at 16 or 17 are not as confident. People who are confident experience the growth spurt younger, like 10, 11, or 9, because at that age, teachers tend to invest in them and treat them as young leaders. So if you become a giant at 20, you're not going to earn a lot.
Does that relationship continue into their adulthood?
Yeah, yeah. So if no,
You know,
for
if let's say you're 10, you have your growth spurt early, so you're an early mature,
yes,
and you
yes.
continue to.
So you
How do you
continuously
know?
do well.
Are you sure that's not genetic? You know?
Well, we'll get to that eventually, but the
Okay.
study was not published by Big Think, but reviewed by Big Think some years ago. But if you become a giant as a teenager, you're less confident.
Hmm.
So the relationship between height and confidence is the reflection of when one became a giant or experienced a growth spurt relative to his peers.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not familiar with that word, but it's
Yeah, yeah, I think Dan I really did the study or commented on it, but I read it several years ago. I just have good memory. Yeah, so that's why I'm able to bring it up. But Curtis, since I've read a number of your articles and Woodley and other people, and there's a term that keeps reappearing: life history. What do we mean when we talk about life history?
sure. Life history originally, and all this stuff is very controversial, and there are
Yes.
multiple arguments surrounding things. But I guess I suppose I'm in one camp out of maybe inertia or just the way I originally started to get interested in life history. But originally, life history was centered around carrying capacity of an island. So let's say you plop an animal on an island, what's the best way for it to populate the island? Well, if resources are abundant, just create a large number of offspring. Well, in life history, kind of transitioned and became uh, a way to talk about differences between species. So you have some species, and the kind of the prototypical one to talk about is an elephant that has a long lifespan, a very extended gestation, one birth per female, um, is a large animal. Sometimes that's put in the mix versus something like a rabbit who procreates several times a year, can have a large litter, but that's more of a quantity strategy. So they have a number of offspring, but don't really parent them. Where an elephant, right, if it has one offspring, if it wants to pass on its genes, better make sure that that offspring survives. And so I think it was Phil Rushton who took the idea of these species differences, and they're thought to be really simplistically on a continuum, and kind of zoomed in at humans and said, oh, well, we're very slow life history like an elephant. But if you zoom in close enough, you find that individuals differ on this continuum as well. So some of us are more It's a little clunky to say, elephant-like, and some of us are a little bit more rabbit-like, and not only in our reproductive and parenting behavior, but in our psychological makeup as well. And so these differences are said to be different life history strategies. So differences in how to reproduce and differences in really how your life unfolds.
Yes, and you wrote a piece on the topic titled "The Measurement of Human Life History."
I did. I'm
Yes,
sorry. Um,
yes, the
I've had several articles in Life History. Yeah, I think ours a little bit different. Um, Maybe this is what you're thinking of. Is I developed a measure
yes.
that
So
was
yes,
an
I remember.
observational measure. So what happens? AJ Figueredo, he's kind of the, I don't know, taking over the mantle. I don't know if that's
Yeah,
the correct way to.
I plan to speak to him soon. But
Yeah,
continue.
yeah, you definitely should. And his it's called a mini K. It's a self-report. So there's items about sexuality and parenting and religiosity and a measure. And self-reports have their positives and negatives. Um, and so do observational measures. But I kind of developed an observational measure for life history.
Yeah, the paper I just referred to, The Measurement of Human Life History, is actually written by Figueredo, Barker, and Woodley. You wrote a similar paper that was published in Science Direct that was linked to personality. So I actually made an error, but I agree with your point. But before we continue, Curtis, should the concept of life history be applied to race?
Hmm. Should.
Because that's
Should.
what
I
Rushton did.
don't know
That's
about that. Should. Um, if individuals have a hypothesis about something,
or can we apply
they
it?
have every right to test it.
Yes, that's what J. Philip Rushton did, and
Mhm.
he was mercilessly criticized for doing so. But what I find interesting is that psychologists often invoke the term life history and they discuss variations among the different races, and they do make the points asserted by J. Philip Rushton, but they don't refer to him. So, for example, economists do know that on average, blacks are less inclined to delay gratification. This is not a scientific article. This is an article published by economists.
All right.
Economists also know that there's a relationship between delayed gratification and economic growth. And outside of Richard Lynn and J. Philip Rushton, many psychologists and biologists do believe that cold winters, even if they do not affect intelligence, can impact your ability to plan. So as someone who is interested in the data, I am looking forward to more nuance on the topic and fascinating research, because research must impact public policy, and we may soon.
I
You
take
can make a point, make a
take
point.
point with that. It often doesn't. It often should, but doesn't. And then some bogus research seems to. So ideally,
Yes, so for example, boys raised in hostile environments tend to be more aggressive on average. However, when they're re-socialized or brought to a different place that's more pristine, they tend to improve and acknowledge that the behavior expressed before was adaptive in that realm but maladaptive elsewhere.
hmm,
So if you make these arguments, one is not being racist, you're just speaking or rather commenting on the empirical data.
yeah, I like the way you put that too as well. There's an adapting your behavior for the environment to achieve positive outcomes. And
Yeah,
so you change the environment.
yeah. So for example, the environment can impact personal development and genetic. and genes. So this is my own theory. I'm yet to test it, but I do believe that because poverty shapes our physiology and intellect, people who reside in poorer communities, they're suffering from genetic mutations. But this has not been tested. This is my own personal view based on surveying the data. So I'm sure, again, you're familiar with the scar row effect, right?
Yes.
Yes, the scar row effect. So my argument is quite simple. I haven't done the data. I haven't examined the data as yet. Because of poverty and gene culture co-evolution and other mutations, people living in certain communities on average have lower IQs due to genetic mutations, and these mutations are quite rapid. So it appears that the scar row effect is real, but we're actually observing something more dangerous.
Um, uh, two things came to mind. One is going back to a question you had about race and life history. I just remembered several years ago, I did conduct a study using AJ Figueiredo's um, self-report measure of life
Yeah.
history and compared scores between whites and blacks to test Rushton's theory, and I found no difference between whites and blacks. So it was counter to Rushton's hypothesis.
That paper was done with Dimitri van der Linden.
It was not. It was. I think it was before I met Dimitri. So it was quite a long time ago. It was when the mini K, which is the name of AJ's measure, it was kind of when it first came out. I just had all, I kept collecting data. And so I had a bunch of students who had taken the measure and some
Yes.
non-students as well. And I just, compiled across studies and yeah, there was no difference.
Yes. So Curtis, this is the paper on life history that you produce, and I would like you to discuss it. The first one was done by Woodley and Figueredo. This one is titled Life History Strategy and Intelligence, Commonality and Personality Profile Differences.
So that's a recent one. On that Scar Row, you mentioned Michael Woodley, been on a couple different papers with him where he asked me, because I kind of, I've got a large cache of data sets and I'm pretty good at remembering the variables in the different data sets. So sometimes people approach me with ideas, and Michael approached me a couple times um, to test the Scar Row. We didn't find evidence for Scar Row in a couple of different studies. But the paper you're talking about is fairly recent, and we looked at differences in kind of personality profiles between intelligence and life history, as I described earlier. And we tend to think that a slow life history is full of all these positive things, like you mentioned,
Yes.
delay gratification, right? If you're slow life history, you can delay gratification. You're more conscientious. You're more empathetic. All these really good things. But you step back, and it's just another strategy. And one of the negative things, and I think you see this all the time, our life histories have slowed quite a bit. What you see all the time is with the slowing of life history, people are timid.
Yes.
So what happens? I don't know why it happens, but that's one of the kind of, I guess, negatives of the slow life history is you got no balls. You're just timid. I guess I'll stick with the original term. Where the intelligence, and this is where, speaking of Michael Woodley and I, he thinks there's basically no relationship between life history and intelligence. I believe there is. I think the evidence points in that direction of a correlation, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, something along those lines. So there, in this study, we do find an overlap, a correlation, 0.5, I think it is, between intelligence and life history strategy, but there are differences as well. And so individuals who are slower in life history tend to be more timid. And people who are high intelligence, they're more rebellious. They're more likely, and I think you mentioned this, Lipton, in your views, they're more likely to buck the trend and call a spade a spade.
Yes. So for example, in a recent conversation with Meisenberg of Mankind Quarterly, we both agree that intelligent people act like they're pro-social to get ahead, but literally they're not truly pro-social. It's just another strategy.
You know how that's differentiated? How do you know someone's, how do you know someone's motivations?
Exactly my point. Exactly my point. We don't. So studies keep showing intelligence is correlated with pro-sociality. Intelligent people are more likely to cooperate. But the evolutionary anthropologists tell us that we cooperate because of selfish benefits. So again, this is just something that I'm throwing out there. Maybe intelligent people are pro-social because of what they can get.
I can think of one study. I really like this study. I think it was a Israeli study. I think these were individuals in the military. And what they did, and it's not pro-social, but it's related to honesty, is they had the individuals, I think if I remember correctly, go to a room, private, they're by themselves, and roll dice. And if the dice come up, let's say two die, and it comes up 2 through 4, they get a certain reward. If it comes up any other number, they don't get any money. And so the average, the likelihood of the die coming up a 2 through 4, and then you can see that you can contrast that with someone's intelligence, whether or not as groups, not as individuals, but as groups, whether or not more intelligent people are more likely to be honest. That is the likelihood that they report a 2 through 4 close to the actual likelihood it would be a 2 to 4. And yeah, the more intelligent people tend to be more honest.
Yeah, because they're motivated to express honesty due to socioeconomic conditions. So, for example, bureaucrats in wealthy countries are less corrupt. Why are they less corrupt? Because corruption is expensive in a rich country. If you're residing in a poor country, it makes sense to accept a bribe because your salary more than likely is low and you're confident that your country may never advance. So someone working in Canada or Singapore or even the United States does not have a strong incentive to be corrupt.
Yeah, it seems like a reasonable hypothesis. I can think of several others,
Yes,
that you
so,
kind
so
of
but
tease out the influence of.
yes, but Curtis, you live in America, right?
Correct.
Yes, so I'm not an American. I live in a developing country, so my insights are different. We're more realistic. Researchers like yourself study people across cultures, but when you live in a developing country, there's much room for nuance.
Well, no, but
What?
I'm not disagreeing with
Yeah, I
you.
know. Yeah,
I
but
was, I was
what
thinking of
you?
other influences as well.
Yeah, what you study is what I have actually experienced, and I
What
can give examples.
what have I studied that I've actually
No, so
experienced?
what you have studied is what I have actually experienced. So remember, we're talking about corruption.
Okay.
Yes, so I can give several examples. People take bribes because they know that the economy may never improve. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
If you're in America, remember America is individualistic, achievement oriented, and for the most part a very honest society. Corrupt countries tend to have people who are more dishonest according to some studies. So as an American, even when you're very stressed and being primed to take a bribe, you're less likely to do it. But if you're somewhere in Nigeria, you take a bribe, no one may never report it, you have nothing to lose.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Seems reasonable.
yes, it does. But it's quite unfortunate that we can't speak as directly as we would like to without being called a bigot. But Curtis, you wrote another piece, The General Factor of Personality and General Intelligence,
Okay.
testing hypotheses from differential K, life history theory, and strategic differentiation integration effort.
Trying to remember that one. I think that is that.
That's the one with Woodley, Ettore B. F. Fernandez, and Thomas.
Yeah, I think that one has been. Someone retested the results of that, and the results were not replicated. If I
So,
remember,
what?
if I'm thinking of the right one, a
Yeah,
few
it
did.
was published in 2014.
Yeah, see, I went back and looked at the studies, and it's so hard for me to remember. But yeah, I'm pretty sure someone just within the last couple years um, wrote a long paper testing the results and didn't replicate it. And I don't doubt it. I always wonder.
Yeah.
I,
So
I think the person who did the replication did a great job, and I trust their results more.
so what were your original findings?
I'm trying to remember. Um,
Okay, so because I can let me read some of the highlights. The
okay.
association between GFP and G across racial groups was examined. The strength of the association varied across racial groups. The results support strategic differentiation integration efforts. So you are basically comparing life history to the personalities of people based on the race.
Yeah, and I think what we found were differences in the general factor of personality across race. I remember. And I think basically the recent research, and here's where I'm sure we're going to get into this too. The recent research shows it's awfully hard, and I think this is the problem with the self-report, awfully hard to compare personality self-reports across races. There might be some factorial invariance or variance. Yeah.
Yes, but yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that point. Obviously this is something taught to student of research methodology. People can lie, but I find it a bit strange that even when controlling for income and IQ, some racial groups are still likely to have children out of wedlock.
Okay.
Yeah, because we're told that intelligent people are conscientious and they're less impulsive. So if you're able to control yourself, then it should also reflect your ability to resist sexual advances.
Yeah, and that seems like a better measure than a self-report. You've got actual real-world behavior. Yeah.
Yes, but Curtis, you there's originally we were discussing personality and income, and you refer to a recent piece you published. We didn't talk much about it, but now I would love for us to discuss it, and I do believe that you remember it because it's quite recent. It's
Okay.
about personality and leadership ability in mainland China, the general factor of personality.
That one I know, and that was actually I'm sure I'm terrible at pronunciations, um, but it is a student in the Netherlands, and he goes by Roger. So he's the first author.
Yes, I can't pronounce his name either. His last
Yeah.
name is Wu,
And the
but
first name has it, but yeah, last name W I think. Yeah, so that's easy, but the first name
yeah.
not so much.
Yeah, so tell us about it. We love to learn.
So there was a couple of studies. One, and this was hard to get published.
Why was it hard?
I was amazed. I think it's a fantastic study.
No, what
So
were the objections? The content?
what were the objections? I think the methodology,
Okay.
but I thought it was fantastic. So we were looking at um, talking about differences between self-report versus real world. And so that general factor of personality we discussed, so it's often it's self-report. Okay, well, what about real world? So um, I guess this is common practice in China, at least according to Roger. Um, what they had is they had a large group of students separated into groups. I think it was four, and each group, each individual took self-report measure of personality, and then each group elected a leader of that group. And then it kind of like branched off, and then you had another group of let's say four, and then they elected a leader, and you winnowed down to the primary leader, I guess. And what we found is the self-report measure of general factor of personality predicted who were elected leaders of their groups. And the people are motivated as well because you get a payoff if you're a leader. So that shows some validity to the idea of this general factor of personality based on self-reports.
But China is an interesting place. Some years ago, The Economist ran a spectacular article arguing that in China, people are short, so they have a strong preference for tall leaders.
Yeah, you're kind of interested in height, huh?
Yeah, I am. And some of us believe that leadership is correlated with voice or physical attraction. Have you done research along that line?
Well, I've done research on physical attractiveness.
Okay. What do you remember the name of that study?
Yeah, I did a couple of them. One related to the GFP, and again, ratings. And so these were late adolescents that were interviewed, and then the interviewer rated the adolescent's physical attractiveness. Maybe they're young adults, I don't recall. And then the participants, the young adults, they had taken, again, a self-report measure of personality. And those who were high in the GFP not only rated themselves more physically attractive, but also were rated more physically attractive by the interviewer. So that's a nice, and I think this has maybe something to do with your interest, Lipton, in mutation load, and that people with maybe a more pleasant personality or a more effective personality also tend to be more physically attractive. And what we did is also looked at the genetic link. And so the link between the general factor of personality and physical attractiveness was, I think, at least 50% genetic. I don't remember the exact percentage, but largely genetic. So that was one of the studies. Another one, I know you're interested in males and females. We looked at, again, rated physical attractiveness. Here they, you had raters looking at yearbooks of individuals when they were in high school. And these individuals are now adults. And you're interested in height as well. So, you know, women like tall guys,
Of
right?
course, they do.
And so I always say, well, they like guys, they like guys taller than them. So they're kind of the metric, you know, if a woman's this tall, she just wants a guy a little taller and so forth. So I reason that maybe intelligence is the same. That is a woman likes, it's not that a woman likes really a brainy guy. It's a woman likes a guy who's a little smarter than she is. And so, and we know guys like hot girls. They like
Yeah.
women.
But Curtis, we're going to spend quite a bit
Oh,
of
really?
time on the topic of beauty. We originally I didn't plan to explore it in depth, but we have to. So Curtis, what you have a PhD in what, psychology?
Yeah.
Yeah, in psychology. So we're often told that intelligence is correlated with success and physical attraction, and that women prefer intelligent men. But many studies do show that women like men who are physically dominant. They like high status men and they like wealthy men. And intelligent men tend to be dominant and they also possess high status. Sex is really important. Basic biology, basic evolutionary anthropology. Men like attractive women and women like healthy men with stamina. So intelligence is actually correlated with these positive attributes. I doubt that women are dating men because they're intelligent. So for example, in crime-ridden countries, women prefer aggressive men who are not necessarily intelligent. We can never get away from sex. Rich men like slim women who are very attractive. Rich women like rich men, but because they have more money, they can invest in personality. But beauty is extremely important. It's in the workplace, for example, attractive graduates do not need a flashy resume. Their looks can function as a substitute. So,
What does that mean with me and my PhD?
oh, so what are you saying, that you are
Oh,
handsome? That's that's. No, are you tall, Curtis?
6'1".
Yeah, you're fairly tall, so If you were around maybe 200 years ago, you'd be quite fruitful. Yeah, someone, the woman would need.
I'm fruitful enough. I don't need any more.
How many children do you have?
I've got 3 kids.
Yeah, that's enough. Yeah. So, but back to our point about beauty. So, a physical attraction even confers benefits on students. Teachers conflate competence with looks,
Mhm.
and there's the persistent halo effect. So remember, children live what they learn. So if boys and girls are taught that they're intelligent and beautiful, eventually they will begin to believe it. You don't enrich the quality of one's intellect by lowering standards. When you raise the standards, people usually comply. So because physically attractive people are blessed, they tend to do better in school since teachers since from day one often assume that they have potential, and it follows them throughout life. So for example, venture capitalists are likely to invest in attractive men. Yeah, so beauty is more than just skin deep. People who say that looks don't matter are shallow.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's just rewarding to look at an attractive person.
It is rewarding to look at someone who's attractive, and it's not rewarding to look at one who doesn't look too pleasant.
Mhm.
And so, and another reason why I'm having this discussion is that income is correlated with even mundane variables. And today in America, we like to talk about race. And race is just one factor. So, for example, recently I saw a study done by that duo. I don't know if it was actually done by Fincher and Thornhill. Maybe I know Fincher contributed to the study, but he's arguing that extrajudicial killings are related to diseases. So in diverse regions, people are less likely to trust out groups, and that creates a conflict. So it's not because of race, but diseases. I know the human mind has evolved to conflate disgust with morality. Hmm. So do you follow Thorny and Fincher?
No, I'm sorry, I don't.
Oh yeah, I think you would like them, especially because they're interested in life history.
I'll have to write that down.
Yeah, Thornhill and Corey Fincher, they're known for the parasitic stress test.
Mhm.
Yeah, but no, Dunkel, the big boy is in the room. We can talk about mutational load. That's the paper
All
you
right,
did with
great boy.
Duchan. Yes. What is mutational load? Just speak for as long as you would like. I'll tell you when to stop because
Oh,
this paper created some controversy.
oh, the one with Ed.
Yes.
Sure. No, let me give you the background on that. It won't be a lengthy background. So, what happened, as I mentioned, that I've kind of got a bunch of data sets and have a good memory of different variables that the data sets include. So if somebody has a hypothesis, I can say, oh, yeah, this data set has this variable. So I think it was Ed contacted me about left-handedness
Yes.
and religiosity or atheism. Yeah, it's the flip side. Um, and so I didn't really know, which was actually beneficial when you think about it scientifically. I didn't know what the hypothesis was. I said, okay, yeah, I'll see if I can run, a correlation. And this is in the MIDIS data set. And I remember they had a real good measure of handedness, an excellent one. And there was a very slight relationship between being an atheist, if I remember correctly, and being left-handed. Now, what's important and what I think is awfully important, I'm sure other people are going to disagree. I don't think p hacking is really, and that's kind of, p hacking is kind of a no-no. That is, you kind of fish for results in your data. I don't view it as that much of a problem if you replicate the results in an independent sample and do it again and again and again. So I think replication is extremely important. When I've tried to replicate those results, I don't find there was a significant relationship between handedness and religiosity or being an atheist. Now, I don't know why that is. The measure of handedness are not as good in these other data sets. So maybe that's it, or maybe there's no relationship. I don't know. But that's kind of my history of being involved in that paper.
Yeah, but what exactly is mutational load?
Sure. Mutational load is basically evolution is driven by mutations, and most of them, there's kind of like random error. Most of them are a problem, are deleterious to reproduction and survival. Once in a while, you get ones that are beneficial, these random errors at the genetic level. And mutational load is kind of the number of these random errors. And I think what we're is really focused in on is the idea that you don't have kind of purifying selection. That is the crucible that used to kind of limit the number of mutations, the random errors that occur, that would kind of weed out those with large number of errors. That crucible is no longer with us. And you see that in the loosening of infant mortality. It's a great thing, of course, but there's always trade-offs. What you have now is a population which with greater amount of mutational load of these kind of random errors that have effects.
Yeah.
Physical
I well, correct me if I'm
I'm kind of
wrong.
speaking for Ed, and I
Yeah,
maybe
you can't speak for head. Correct me if I'm wrong, but based on what I read, I think the essence of the paper is that because of evolution, people with mutational load, whether it be left-handedness or autism, they're less likely to be religious. And Ed has written that in the past, religious people were more educated and they pass on intelligence and their genes. So I think it can be understood somewhere along that line.
okay.
Yeah, me too. But Curtis, I really wanted to interview you because of a paper you did in response to Kevin McDonald and Nathan Kofnos. So let me give some background. Kevin McDonald is an evolutionary anthropologist, and he argues that Judaism is a group evolutionary strategy, and as a result, Jews undermine Western civilization directly and indirectly. I've also interviewed Kevin, and I responded to Nathan Kofnos. It's a short piece, just over 1,200 words, that was published by Countercurrents. But you wrote a piece that was recently published by Mankind Quarterly titled An Empirical Test of the Competing Kofnos and MacDonald Hypothesis on Religion and Political Orientation. Go ahead.
Okay. So in that paper, and McDonald, well, if I could give a little background, I think that would be helpful before I delve into the paper. I became interested in intelligence. I was actually, as a student, studying identity and not intelligence, but I'd end up at the library studying intelligence because really smart people were arguing with each other about really hot topics. Never thought I'd study it. But when you read about intelligence, you run into group differences, and there, in terms of groups, Jews score very high on IQ tests. Okay, fair enough. And I know that there's arguments back and forth and back and forth. I mentioned, okay, I've got these data sets. What's the point of science but to try and empirically answer questions? And so it made sense to me to look at differences between Jews and Catholics and Lutherans and so forth to see if there any support for any of these different positions. So it's not just people arguing back and forth, but you got some data. So that was kind of where I was coming from in terms of starting my work in the area. In this latest paper that you mentioned, I think both Kaufness and McDonald reviewed it, and neither of them really were keen on my idea that I was representing their ideas.
Because your paper is not very philosophical. I read it.
Yeah, I don't exactly. I have no desire to get into group evolutionary strategies. I just want to kind of hold close to the data. And what I ended up finding was what I thought was support for neither Kaufman's so-called default hypothesis or McDonald's group evolutionary strategy hypothesis. That is, tried looking at different ways that would explain why Jews tend to be politically left-wing, and yeah, nothing really panned out.
All right. Could you tell us a little more about your findings? So, for example, how did they contradict the ideas of McDonald? Give us an example.
Yeah, that's a real good question. Let's see here. Like I said, I'm not the best at memorizing my own studies here. Let's see. I did print something off because I thought you might ask.
Good.
I'm sorry to interrupt here or take a break. So it says McDonald's group evolutionary theory suggests that Jews who live in Gentile society may act to push those societies in a more politically left-wing direction, thereby undermining these societies' cohesive sense of nationalism. Jewish intellectuals are motivated to achieve this outcome due to high group in-group favoritism. So what I did in terms of that is look to see whether or not in-group favoritism predicted left-wing ideology, and it did not.
All right. And did you write down an example to debunk the ideas of Kaufman's?
Sure. So Kaufness, as I do remember, Kaufness's default hypothesis is that Jews tend to be left-wing because they live in cities, basically.
Yes, and on average, they have higher IQs. So my analysis is that Jewish people have resided in Western civilization for centuries, though their culture remains distinct. And as such, the Jews have been criticized and battered. Therefore, it would make sense for Jewish people to be skeptical of Western civilization.
That seems fair to me.
Yes, yeah, I think McDonald should write more profusely on this point. If you have been living in a civilization for thousands of years and people still think that you're weird, then in the interest of the group, you should be ethnocentric and maybe you ought to undermine said civilization. So I don't view McDonald's idea as one that's anti-Semitic. I think it's quite logical and coherent. It's just that the politics needs to be removed. So, for example, McDonald writes on immigration and Jewish multiculturalism, and there's a point, but I prefer to discuss Judaism as a group evolutionary strategy. I'm less interested in the politics of Jewish activism.
I think for me, you could kind of flip it. I'm just interested in independently, and this is where Kaufness he confounds the two in his latest article. A group evolutionary strategy and in-group favoritism. In-group favoritism can emerge from any number of causes. It doesn't have to be a group evolutionary strategy. So I'm just curious or was interested in whether or not first, Jews had a greater level of in-group favoritism. It appears that, to me, Kaufman disagrees, it appears as if they do. And as you mentioned, that seems like a reasonable thing as well.
Yes, but since we're on the issue of religion, Curtis, is there a relationship between the level of religiosity and ethnocentrism? You have a paper titled Religious In-Group Preference, a Replication and Extension into the Domain of Identity. You don't need to get into it. I just want to know your opinion and findings on the issue of religion and ethnocentrism.
It depends on the religion.
Okay, so which religion did you study?
Well, we looked at Jews and Lutherans, at least some Protestant group in that study, and Catholics, and maybe Baptists. And you do find differences. The main difference are Jews show a heightened is maybe wrong, show greater in-group favoritism than these other groups. Now that could be, the reason I corrected myself in terms of heightened, you could have suppressed in the other groups. So you always have to think about the comparisons.
Yes, and again, we can revert to what I said earlier. If you are resident in a society for thousands of years and people don't trust you or you're treated poorly, then one would have a reason to be ethnocentric.
Mhm.
I think that's a fair point. But Curtis, I know that this may not be your area of expertise, but as someone who is very erudite and well read, do you have an opinion on the causes of racial differences in intelligence?
Uh, what race differences?
No, so for the black white IQ gap, do you have any opinion on the issue?
I'm going to say no on that.
No, none whatsoever. Okay, my own position is that it's a combination of genetics, the environment, and culture. So, for example, a respected academic, William Julius Wilson, Elijah Anderson, and many others argue that the culture that emerged in Black inner cities is an impediment to doing well in white corporate America. So I think it's a cultural issue and it's also a genetic issue. People inherit genes and they also inherit personalities. And as we said earlier, if you're living in a harsh environment, one may need to be violent to get ahead. But such practices are not necessary in the real world or the corporate world. And it's quite similar to another paper you wrote examining the relationship between neighborhood safety and inequality titled The Association of Perceived Neighborhood Safety and Inequality in Personality. Would you like to tell us a little about it?
Sure. Although the previous question, I think your answer goes for just about everything, combination of genetic and environmental factors. It goes for personality as well. So my co-authors, I think, are a little bit more inclined to stress the role of genetics and personality. I see a little bit more of a role of the environment, but not discounting genetics. And in this study, what we did is we looked at differences in that general factor of personality and related to the neighborhood environment, how safe the environment was, self-report, however, and how equal the environment was. And we found that individuals who report living in a less safe neighborhood had a lower general factor of personality, which makes complete sense to me. If you are in a rough neighborhood or a dangerous neighborhood, you most likely are going to be less open, less agreeable, less extroverted, more neurotic. Conscientiousness probably depends on what you're measuring. You might be more vigilant, but less likely to worry about crossing your T's and dotting your I's. And what we did is we looked at people across time, and it was at least 10 years. So 4 reports, so people move around. And so you can look within the person, does their personality change based on their change in neighborhood? And we also looked at differences between monozygotic twins as a way to try to control for genetic confounds. And we found that the identical twin who lived in the more dangerous neighborhood had a lower general factor of personality.
Oh, okay then.
There have also been studies, which I really admire. I think nettle and maybe pepper. There's a group And they've done experiments. So they've driven people to dangerous neighborhoods or nice neighborhoods and have had them, I believe, complete different measures of personality. And you find then, it's a random assignment. You find cause and effect.
Yes, I like your findings because people living in violent neighborhoods are sometimes unable to think long term, and usually it's not in their best interest to think long term. Remember, if your community is violent and you're poor, and as a result, your ability to access quality nutrition is low, then one cannot focus. So, again, it's feasible to develop a present orientation of time versus a future orientation of time. So, this is one reason why people in the lower socioeconomic strata are more likely to spend and less inclined to save because they view time literally in terms of today. If you live in a particular ghetto that's overly violent, you may die at 25. So what's the sense of planning to live to be 50?
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Is your background in economics a little bit?
I studied history and international relations, but I read economics. I contribute to Mises and other publications.
I'm curious as your opinion. So, um, related to what you're saying, we conducted, colleagues and I, studies looking at attitudes and expected behaviors based on expected lifespan. So how do you behave if you think you've got 5 years to live or 50 years to live? And you find these shifts in behavior. I've been thinking about inflation. So what we hypothesize is if you're shifting your life history strategy. So if you've got 5 years to live, you're not going to save for the future. You're going to do whatever you want to do right now. If you have 5 days to live, who gives a crap? Do whatever. If you have 50 years, you better plan. You be methodical and so forth. I'm wondering, would inflation, monetary inflation, we know you can't save, right? I mean, what's the point of saving? Does inflation act as an environmental cue itself to speed up life history? Give me
Yes, let me tell you why I'm saying this, and this is not just because I've read empirical studies, but there is a direct link between prices and family formation. If it's expensive to purchase a home, people are less likely to marry and have children. Many studies are on the topic.
is anyone connecting all this with life history theory?
Economics is a very interesting field. I do believe that people like yourself need the research of economists. However, economists are not writing on science like scientists. So their level of understanding is not as deep, but they do write a lot on genetics. So if you're interested in the relationship between genes and economic growth, read an economist. To be honest, I think the best research on race is done by economists, but they're not familiar with the breakthroughs in science, but they do tend to produce good research.
What would you have opinions on Heckman?
Oh, James Heckman?
Yeah,
He's an interesting fellow, but he's quite nuanced. So James Heckman is still a bit skeptical of the relationship between poverty and genes. I don't think his argument is conclusive. But Heckman is an interesting guy. He's an advocate of early childhood education. But
we
and
found we found a recent study, and maybe this is sending me on the economics track a little bit, that the Carolina Abacadarian Project, which is early childhood education, had all these effects on IQ and social outcomes, that these effects were really mediated by life history. So the early investment in children, especially an environment that's predictable, cause life history to slow down and has these long-term impacts, being less likely to abuse drugs.
Yes,
Um,
there's actually a study exploring the issue published by Frontiers in Psychology. I don't remember the name of it, but a study was done. But the environment impacts genes, and genes and culture affect how we earn and what we do. So, for example, because of their fast life history, children raised in poor communities are encouraged to be obedient because disobedience could result in them being dead. However, again, in the real world, one has to be innovative and individualistic.
mhm,
So, working class people grew up l- learning to follow rules instead of innovating. And again, innovation is based on socioeconomic dynamics and genes. We are likely to inherit the personalities of our parents. The children of innovators are also likely to be innovators. And if you're not an innovator, but your friends are innovators, then your children may innovate. This is what research has shown. Yeah, but it's a very fascinating topic, and there's also the issue of what some call early life stressors and their impact on life history.
mhm.
Yes, but Curtis, I enjoyed our discussion. We have been speaking for a while,
Yeah.
and at some point you'll be invited again. What would you like to talk about?
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. What about Bitcoin exactly?
Uh, Bitcoin as the opposite of what we are talking about with inflation.
Okay,
Could
okay,
that
all
be
right.
an environmental, could that produce an environmental effect that allows is, so I'm viewing inflation as a environmental pressure to speed up life history.
Okay,
Would sound monetary policy allow slow life history individuals to exact their slow life history behaviors?
all right. In very compelling and spectacular paper. All right. So I have your email, so we'll continue to speak, but I'm going to say bye and we'll talk again. All right, bye.
Hey, Lipton. Hey,
Yeah.
nice to meet you. Thanks for
Yeah.
the
All right.
conversation.
Bye.